For 35 days, an empire that stretched across a subcontinent did not just tremble, it held its breath in raw terror. For 35 agonizing days, its legitimate princes were hunted down and blinded. Its most powerful nobles were systematically executed, and its ancient throne was desecrated, occupied by a terrified child who was nothing more than a puppet. The man pulling the strings, the architect of this nightmare, was not a royal heir, not a foreign conqueror, but a man who had begun his life as someone else's property. He was a slave, captured during a brutal invasion, a man whose only inheritance was supposed to be servitude. This, from Chronicles of Old Tales, is the story of Malik Kafur's bloody, audacious, and ultimately suicidal grab for absolute power. How did a man, whose very existence was once recorded on a bill of sale, ascend to become the most feared and hated man in all of India? What dark alchemy of ambition, genius, and cruelty allowed him to climb over the bodies of his rivals? And what could he possibly do in just 35 days, a mere month of stolen authority, to not only shatter a dynasty, but to seal his own horrific doom? To understand how the slave became the master, we must journey back into the heart of a savage age. We return to the turn of the 14th century, a time of staggering violence and limitless ambition. The Delhi Sultanate, forged and maintained by the iron fist of Sultan Alauddin Khilji, was one of the most powerful and merciless regimes on earth. Khilji himself was a man who had waded through blood to get to his throne, murdering his own uncle and father-in-law to seize power. His empire was built on a foundation of endless conquest and held together by a network of spies and terrifying, theatrical punishments. It was a world where power was the only currency that mattered, and loyalty was a commodity to be bought, sold, or discarded at a whim. And into this glittering, violent world stepped a young slave, a boy with nothing to his name, who would learn its brutal lessons better, more completely, than anyone had ever dared. Malik Kafur does not enter the pages of history as a person, but as an object, a piece of plunder. His story begins in 1299, in the chaotic aftermath of the Delhi Sultanate's invasion of the wealthy coastal province of Gujarat. The port city of Khambhat, a jewel of trade and prosperity, was sacked by Alauddin's ferocious general, Nusrat Khan. Amidst the fire, the screaming, and the looting, a young slave was captured. He was said to possess a striking, almost ethereal beauty, and for this reason, he was purchased for the exorbitant price of 1,000 dinars, earning him the moniker that would follow him for the rest of his life. Hazardinari, the Thousand-Dinar Man. Presented as a war trophy to Sultan Alauddin Khilji in the sprawling, fortified capital of Delhi, the young man, now named Malik Kafur, immediately captivated the most powerful man in India. The court chroniclers of the time, men like the pious and aristocratic Jiyuddin Barani, tell us that Alauddin became utterly and completely infatuated with him. Barani, whose writings are tinged with the contempt of a nobleman for a low-born slave, described the Sultan's feelings in scandalous terms, claiming that in those 4 or 5 years when the Sultan was losing his memory and his senses, he had fallen deeply and madly in love with the Malik Naib. Was this, as Barani and other modern scholars suggest, a deep-seated romantic and sexual obsession? Or was it something else, something far more calculated? Alauddin was a notoriously paranoid ruler. He trusted no one, least of all the powerful Turkish nobles who surrounded him, each with his own web of family ties, allegiances, and ambitions. He saw conspiracy in every shadow, a dagger behind every smile. In Kafur, he found something unique, a man of immense talent who was utterly alone. Kafur had no family, no clan, no history. He was a blank slate. His loyalty could not be divided because he had no one to be loyal to except the man who owned him, the Sultan himself. He was the perfect instrument, a tool of pure, unadulterated will for a ruler who saw betrayal everywhere. Alauddin did not just keep Kafur as a companion, he invested in him. He saw a mind uncluttered by the petty squabbles and ancient feuds of the established aristocracy. He gave Kafur the finest military training, an education in the ruthless arts of war and statecraft. Soon, he was given a command. It was a move that must have sent shockwaves of outrage and disgust through the court's old guard. A slave, a piece of property, was being elevated above them. But any doubts about the Sultan's judgment were soon obliterated. In 1306, Kafur faced his first monumental test, a massive Mongol invasion, a recurring nightmare for the Sultanate. These were not minor skirmishes. The Mongol hordes were a force that had toppled empires across the known world. But Kafur didn't just repel them. He crushed them. He met them on the banks of the Ravi River and delivered a victory so absolute, so decisive, that it cemented his position as the Sultanate's rising star. The slave was now a general. The property was now a hero. And as he stood over the battlefield, surrounded by the evidence of his own brutal genius, Malik Kafur was just getting started. He had learned his first lesson in this savage world. Survival was not enough. To be truly safe, one had to be feared. With the northern frontiers brutally secured against the Mongol threat, Alauddin Khilji, ever the expansionist, turned his gaze south. His eyes were fixed on the Deccan Plateau and beyond, a land of fabled kingdoms overflowing with unimaginable wealth. For centuries, these southern realms had remained largely untouched by the northern invaders. They were rich in gold, diamonds, and ancient temples groaning under the weight of generations of offerings. Alauddin wanted it all, and the man he chose to lead these ambitious, perilous campaigns was Malik Kafur. This was an unprecedented, almost unthinkable level of trust. Kafur wasn't just being given an army. He was being made the living avatar of the Sultan's will, sent to operate hundreds, even thousands, of miles from the watchful eye of Delhi. In the south, he was the Sultan. This decision demonstrated that Kafur had become more than a favorite. He was now the most important and indispensable man in the empire, second only to Alauddin himself. From 1308 to 1311, Malik Kafur carved a relentless and bloody path of conquest through southern India. His campaign was a masterclass in military strategy and psychological warfare. He first marched against the Yadava king of Devagiri, who had dared to cease paying his tribute to Delhi. Kafur's invasion was swift and merciless. He crushed the Yadava resistance, subjugated their king, and then, in a shrewd political move, treated the defeated ruler with enough respect to ensure his future loyalty, turning a vanquished foe into a valuable vassal. But Devagiri was just the beginning. In 1310, he pushed further south, laying siege to Warangal, the capital of the powerful Kakatiya kingdom. Warangal was protected by a legendary set of double fortifications, a mud wall of immense circumference, and an inner stone citadel, believed by many to be impregnable. For a month, Kafur's army battered at the defenses, his siege engines relentlessly pounding the walls. Finally, he breached the outer fortress, and the Kakatiya king, Prataparudra, was forced to surrender. The tribute he offered was staggering. He handed over his entire treasury, and with it, legend claims, a diamond of unparalleled size and brilliance. The Koh-i-Noor, a stone that would become a symbol of ultimate power and a coveted prize for emperors and empires for centuries to come. With the wealth of Warangal loaded onto elephants, Kafur still wasn't finished. The taste of conquest was intoxicating. Next, he turned his army against the Hosla kingdom, besieging their capital at Dwarasamudra. The Hosla king, faced with the terrifying reputation that now preceded Kafur's army, quickly submitted, surrendering yet more treasure. From there, Kafur launched his most daring campaign yet, a lightning raid deep into the Pandya kingdom in the farthest reaches of southern India, a territory few northern armies had ever dared to penetrate. He sacked the holy city of Madurai, plundering its magnificent temples and setting fire to what he couldn't carry. When Malik Kafur finally returned to Delhi in 1311, he was greeted as a conquering hero. The spectacle of his return was a thing of legend. He brought with him a treasure hoard that staggered the imagination of an already wealthy sultanate. One chronicler, Amir Khusro, recorded the plunder with breathless awe: 612 elephants, 20,000 horses, and 96,000 mons of gold. Literally tons of gold and chests overflowing with pearls and jewels. It was, by all accounts, the greatest single seizure of wealth in the Sultanate's history. With each victory, with each mountain of plundered gold, Malik Kafur proved not just his military genius, but his absolute, unwavering loyalty. He had stripped the south of its wealth not for himself, but for his master. He was no longer just a favored slave or a competent general. He was the scourge of the south, the right hand of the Sultan, an indispensable pillar of the empire. But as he delivered the world to his master, a dangerous thought must have taken root in his mind. If he could conquer kingdoms for the Sultan, what could he conquer for himself? While Malik Kafur's power was reaching its zenith, the source of that power, his master, was beginning to fade. In the last years of his reign, from roughly 1313 to 1315, Sultan Alauddin Khilji, the iron-fisted emperor, was consumed by a serious illness. The disease eroded not just his body, but his mind. His legendary decisiveness gave way to a festering paranoia, his engagement with the world replaced by a bitter, reclusive existence within the palace walls. He withdrew from the daily rigors of public life, becoming a ghost haunting his own court. Into this power vacuum stepped one man. Recalled from his governorship in the Deccan, Malik Kafur was appointed Naib, or viceroy, of the entire sultanate. He was now, for all intents and purposes, the de facto ruler of the empire. The administration of the vast territories he had helped conquer, the command of its armies, and control of its treasury all fell into his hands. The slave now held the empire in his grasp, ruling in the name of a dying king. One can only imagine the incandescent rage this provoked among the established Turkish nobility. These were men who traced their lineage to conquerors, who saw themselves as the rightful heirs to power. And now, they were forced to bow to a former slave, a man they viewed as an upstart, a eunuch of lowly Hindu origin who had usurped their birthright. Their resentment was thick and palpable, poisoning the very air of the court. The whispers in the gilded halls of the Hazar Sultan, the palace of 1,000 pillars, turned to venomous plots and conspiracies. Kafur, a master of survival, knew exactly what this meant. He saw the nobles not just as rivals, but as a mortal threat. In the brutal world of the Delhi court, if you did not strike first, you did not strike at all. The court became a nest of vipers, and Kafur, with his unparalleled access to the ailing sultan, prepared to defang his enemies one by one. His chief rival was a powerful and respected noble named Alp Khan, the governor of Gujarat. Alp Khan was not just influential, he was deeply embedded in the royal family. His sister, Maru, was one of Alauddin's wives, and his own daughters were married to Alauddin's two eldest sons, Khizr Khan and Shadi Khan. This made him a central figure in the traditional power structure and a natural rallying point for the old guard. Kafur, using his intimate, daily access to the paranoid and suggestible sultan, began to pour poison into his master's ear. He spun tales of conspiracy, convincing Alauddin that Alp Khan, the brother of his wife and father-in-law of his sons, was plotting to kill him and seize the throne. In his state of illness and fear, Alauddin believed him. The order was given. Alp Khan was executed. The assassination sent a shockwave of terror through the court. Kafur had eliminated his most powerful rival with the Sultan's own authority. But he wasn't done. With Alp Khan gone, Kafur moved against the heirs themselves, the very sons of the man he claimed to serve. Khizr Khan, the heir apparent, and his brother Shadi Khan were accused of negligence and conspiracy. On Kafur's command, they were stripped of their titles and imprisoned in the grim, remote fortress of Gwalior, a place from which few returned. Kafur was systematically dismantling the royal family, cutting it down branch by branch, isolating the dying sultan from anyone who could challenge the viceroy's authority. He was meticulously, ruthlessly clearing the board, ensuring that when the moment of the sultan's death finally arrived, no one, no noble, no prince, no queen, would be left to stand in his way. The story of Malik Kafur is one of history's most stunning and brutal masterclasses in the acquisition and consolidation of power. Here on Chronicles of Old Tales, we believe these hidden histories are some of the most compelling stories ever told. If you agree and want to help us uncover more of these incredible tales, please take a moment to subscribe and hit that like button. It is your support that allows us to bring these narratives to light. But don't go anywhere. The final act is about to begin. The Sultan is on his deathbed, the princes are in chains, and Malik Kafur is about to make his final, bloodiest move. On the cold winter night of January 4th, 1316, Sultan Alauddin Khilji, the conqueror, the tyrant, the most powerful ruler of his age, drew his last breath. Or perhaps it was drawn for him. The chroniclers, writing with a mixture of fear and awe, whisper a darker tale. Jud-Din Barani notes that, according to some people, Malik Kafur himself committed the final, ultimate betrayal, smothering his ailing master and lover, hastening the inevitable to seize the power he had so patiently and bloodily cultivated. Whether by murder or by illness, the throne was now empty, and Malik Kafur did not waste a single hour, a single moment. The very next day, he convened a council of the court's most powerful nobles, men already trembling with fear and uncertainty. There, in the shadow of the dead Sultan, Kafur produced a document, a supposed will from Aladdin himself. This will, which had appeared with suspicious convenience, was a masterpiece of political maneuvering. It disinherited the imprisoned heir, Khizr Khan, and instead named Aladdin's 6-year-old son, Shihabuddin Omar, as the new Sultan. And, in a stroke of breathtaking audacity, it named Malik Kafur as the regent, the absolute ruler of the empire until the boy came of age. He placed the bewildered child on the throne, a puppet king whose strings he held firmly in his hand. To legitimize his power and bind himself to the dynasty he was secretly planning to destroy, some sources claim he took an even more shocking step. He forced the boy's mother, Aladdin's principal widow, to marry him. The slave who was once owned by the Sultan had now become the Sultan's successor and stepfather to the new king. With the full, terrifying authority of the state now his to command, Kafur unleashed his reign of terror. According to the chroniclers, it lasted just 35 days, but it was a period of such concentrated brutality that it would be burned into the memory of the Sultanate forever. His first order of business was the complete and total elimination of any potential rivals from Aladdin's bloodline. He dispatched his agents, his most loyal cutthroats, to the Gwalior fort with a chilling and precise order to blind the imprisoned princes, Khizr Khan and Shadi Khan. The act was carried out with sickening barbarity. The chroniclers describe it with a horrifying phrase, stating that their eyes were sliced from their sockets like melons. It was a message to the entire empire. Not even the sons of the great Aladdin were safe. There was no line Kafur would not cross. He then had Aladdin's third son, the teenaged Mubarak Khan, placed under strict house arrest, his execution already planned and merely waiting for an opportune moment. A wide and bloody purge of the court followed. Anyone remotely suspected of loyalty to Aladdin's fallen family, any noble who had ever voiced dissent, any official who posed even a potential threat, was targeted. They were arrested, stripped of their titles and wealth, imprisoned, or, more often than not, simply executed without trial. Malik Kafur, the man who had once been bought and sold like cattle, now treated the empire's most powerful men as his personal property, to be disposed of as he saw fit. For 35 nightmarish days, he was the undisputed, absolute, and terrifying master of the Delhi Sultanate. His power was total, his cruelty was boundless, and his throne was built upon a foundation of terror, betrayal, and blood. A throne built on sheer terror is a throne built on sand. Malik Kafur's stunning, inhuman ruthlessness was not just his greatest weapon, it was the seed of his own destruction. He had systematically eliminated every noble and prince who could challenge him, but in his paranoia, he overlooked the one group whose loyalty he could not buy or break. The very men who served as his palace guards, the elite foot soldiers known as Pakes, had also been the personal bodyguards of the late Aladdin Khilji. These were not faceless mercenaries. They were veteran soldiers who had served the old Sultan with fierce devotion for years. They had watched him build an empire, and they had stood guard over his life. Now, they watched in silent, mounting horror as the man their master had trusted above all others, the slave he had raised to glory, systematically and gleefully dismantled his family and legacy. For these men, their oath to the dead Sultan, their loyalty to his memory and his house, began to outweigh their fear of his terrifying regent. Led by an officer named Mubashir, a conspiracy began to form within the very heart of the palace guard. Legend adds a dramatic flair to the final moments. One story claims that Kafur, impatient to finish his bloody work, finally sent his assassins to blind the last remaining adult son, Mubarak Khan. But Mubarak, in a desperate, last-ditch gamble for his life, managed to bribe his would-be executioners. He dangled a priceless, jeweled necklace before them, a treasure from his royal inheritance, and convinced them that their future was brighter with him than with the hated regent. He persuaded them to turn on the man who had sent them. Whether that specific tale of bribery is true or not, the conclusion was the same. The Pakes made their decision. Their loyalty was to the House of Khilji, not to the man destroying it. One night, just over a month into Kafur's reign of terror, they acted. They burst into Kafur's private chambers in the palace, catching the tyrant completely by surprise. The man who had blinded princes and executed nobles found himself cornered by the unlikeliest of avengers. The end was swift and brutal, a fittingly violent end to a violent man. The Pakes fell upon him and beheaded the man who had terrorized an empire. Just 35 days after seizing absolute power, Malik Kafur was dead. His bloody reign, a brief and shocking explosion of ambition, was over as quickly and violently as it had begun. So what are we to make of this astonishing figure, Malik Kafur? His story defies easy categorization. He rose from the lowest possible station in human society to the absolute highest, a journey powered by his own undeniable genius and the favor of a paranoid sultan who saw in him a perfect tool. He was, without question, a brilliant military commander, a strategist who expanded the Delhi Sultanate to its greatest ever extent and filled its coffers with more wealth than it had ever known. But he was also a pathologically ruthless political operator, a man who chose terror and betrayal as his primary instruments to first gain, and then secure, his power. His brief, violent rule left the Khilji dynasty shattered beyond repair. The purge of the most experienced nobility and the systematic murder and mutilation of the royal family created a catastrophic power vacuum. This vacuum led directly to more chaos and instability. The surviving son, Mubarak Shah, proved to be an ineffectual ruler and was himself murdered within 4 years, bringing the once mighty dynasty to a pathetic end. They were replaced by the Tughlaqs, and the Khilji era was over. Kafur's legacy is so dark, so steeped in blood, that monstrous legends grew around him for centuries. The unsubstantiated but persistent tale that he had one of the princes not just blinded, but skinned alive, speaks volumes. The truth of the matter is almost irrelevant. The fact that people believed it, that it was a story that seemed plausible given his actions, is a testament to the sheer terror he inspired. So who was he? Was Malik Kafur a monster born of pure, unadulterated ambition? Or was he the inevitable and tragic product of the brutal, violent world that had first enslaved him? Was he a man who, having experienced the ultimate powerlessness, learned that the only way to truly survive was to become more ruthless, more calculating, and more savage than his masters? His 35-day reign remains one of the most shocking, dramatic, and terrifying chapters in Indian history. A short, bloody, and cautionary saga that demonstrates how the singular ambition of one person, forged in suffering and fueled by fear, can bring a great empire to its knees. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the dark heart of history with Chronicles of Old Tales. If you found this story as compelling as we did, don't forget to subscribe and share it. There are countless more tales buried in the past, waiting to be told.